Well, good afternoon. Thank you all for attending today's webinar. I'm Shannon Sims. I am a Vice President in AVAP's Advisory Services, and I co-lead our organizational change management practice. And we really appreciate you joining us today for our second session in our organizational resilience webinar series. Today we'll be talking about combating change fatigue and really focusing on strengthening your organizational resilience. So today I think we have a really great session outlined for you, and you will be led by my friend and colleague, Mark Dillard. Mark is a director in our change management practice, and he resides down in Atlanta, Georgia, so it might be a little warmer there than where it is here in Ohio. But Mark brings over 20 years of experience across industries, working with senior leaders at some of the biggest names in the nation. He has worked at Coca-Cola, he has worked at Accenture, he has done consulting work with Chesapeake Energy and General Motors, University of Georgia, and currently is working on a large-scale transformation effort with Louisiana's Children's Medical Center down in Louisiana. Mark really brings such strong expertise in leading the design and the execution of change strategies to support enterprise-wide initiatives. He has a strong commitment to really building internal capability, which often focuses on providing coaching to executives on how to lead change. His years of experience has been in the organization development space with a master's degree in industrial organizational psychology. He really brings a very human-centered approach to his work. And what he's going to be sharing with us today in this session is really to talk about the key factors that impact organizational resilience. What is organizational resilience? Why is it important for us as we think about where we are in our current climate today? He's going to just outline an approach for how you assess change fatigue and resilience, and what a roadmap for taking action can actually look like to help you strengthen that resilience and your change capacity. So I think you're in for a great treat for our second session today. Now, before I hand it over to Mark, I just want to point out that if you do have any questions, please feel free to submit them at any time during the webinar. You can do so through the Q&A function or the chat function, and we'll be sure to make sure that we get those answered, but we will hold those questions till the end. Lastly, an on-demand version of today's webinar will be made available on our website in about 2 days. And then everyone who registered for this webinar will also receive an email with a link so that you can view the webinar on demand or share it with your coworkers if you feel like they would benefit from this information. And we will also make sure that we send a link to you to register for the third session next Wednesday on personal resilience. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Mark. Take it away.
Great. Thank you, Shannon. I appreciate it. And I appreciate everybody taking the time this afternoon. I am broadcasting from Atlanta, Georgia, where it is beautiful today. Sunny, cold by Atlanta standards. I hope I'm not going to get any sympathy from anybody in the Northeast. I hope everybody's doing okay with the weather that just swept through there. I think it's pretty white north of us here. Some of you might have been in Shannon's really great webinar last Wednesday on change fatigue. This really builds off of that. I'll reintroduce some things just as context. And for some of you that weren't in her change fatigue webinar last week, it'll be new information for you. But as she said, this is really a brief introduction to how we think about organizational resilience. And it really, as you'll see, is about 3 different factors we found. And that really is based on our experience and research. So Olivia, if you could click forward, please. I won't surprise anybody on this call to know 2020 was a bit of a interesting year. I don't want to say it was a mess, but it certainly was a challenge. And even under normal circumstances, right? Disruption and change is difficult for organizations to manage, but 2020 just kind of piled on as it relates to that. And we were able to. A lot of us were lucky enough and fortunate enough to continue to work remotely, but that's just simply not a replacement for in-person and face-to-face kind of interactions. So it really is, I know unprecedented is one of those overused words, but it's very apt. I mean, organizations are really scrambling to and still scrambling, obviously scrambling like crazy, March through probably June, but still scrambling to do their best to keep people focused and engaged. And so far, it really has been, and including our organization, a reactive stance, right? Is doing your best to resolve problems as they pop up in this new working environment. And a reactive stance is important, and there's nothing wrong with that. But over time, it can be exhausting. It can wipe you out. As anybody on this call knows, who's been in a situation where they're in a constant firefighting mode, that is not a sustainable position, both for your personal health and organizational health. So 2020 really was that kind of year. And you can see down in the red there, the change fatigue is real. And I think we're all feeling that. Again, our organization included, we're no different. So if you'll click move forward, please, Olivia, thank you. Shannon, some of you were on Shannon's last week, and she shared some of these things. What we found, interestingly, is now, right when COVID hit, you didn't see a lot of research and stuff on how people are coping with what's happening with COVID from an organizational standpoint. Now you're starting to see a lot of that just from a timing standpoint. And this we pulled straight from SHRM, and everybody's heard of SHRM, COVID-19 research, and you can see some of these numbers here. It's been difficult and actually more difficult for some demographics. If you think about this stuff, people are struggling, and you think about, particularly, and some of my friends and some of our colleagues are in this boat. Young parents who are trying to manage their kids being in remote schools, while also managing a workload that not only doesn't seem to have been reduced, but actually increased because there's no leaving the office. So you'll see some of these numbers, 22% having difficulty concentrating, younger employees at a higher rate, 35% experiencing symptoms of depression often. That's a frightening number, I think. People feeling tired, little energy, women significantly more, and that, I don't know what the story is behind that, but I suspect it may have something to do with parenting duties. Women feeling like they have to take on a larger bulk of that. Feeling burned out, and then emotionally drained from work. And this is really only one set of statistics. There was again, in kind of doing our work and preparing this, there's a lot of stuff out there, but this is a pretty good snapshot. Olivia, could you go forward, please? So the struggle's real. I just wanted to give you that context, the SHRM stuff, and talk a little bit about what's happening as background and people trying to manage through their work priorities, and it's just tough. So again, and I mentioned earlier, organizations that having done organizational change management work for a long time, that's why they hire us. A lot of organizations aren't really historically very good at this and are trying to get better at managing change. So they even see a greater risk of problematic disruption with COVID. And then people just generally struggling with not only the quantity of the demands facing them, but the quality of the demands, being remote, not being able to collaborate as they used to. So the struggle's real. The struggle's real. Okay, Olivia, could forward, please. So one of the things we like to do, and I'll turn it over to Olivia to kind of give you some quick instructions, is to kind of get your sense of what is your organization's current level of change fatigue.
Hi, this is Olivia. So we're going to ask that you pull out your smartphones. We're going to be doing some interactive polling. So if you could pull out your smartphone or just open up another window on your desktop and go to this website at the top. So pollev.com/avapocm. And again, that's pollev.com/avaapocm. And then that's going to bring you to a screen that asks for your name. So please just fill in your name. That's totally anonymous still. And then it's going to bring you to this question. So just click your answer, and we would love to see your responses.
And we'll give you a few minutes to get yourself sorted with that. Right now, we're staring at a big high number, very high, trending to the right side here, confirming some of the things I talked about in my earlier slides. Okay, here's an average. Okay, so maybe give it another 20, 30 seconds. All right. Okay, I think Olivia, I think we can forge ahead. Let's keep that up for just a second. So clearly, on this call, 73% is a statistically significant number, and it's not surprising. So think about that for just a minute. If you're responsible for implementing any kind of change, let's say it's implementing a new enterprise-wide software system, reorganization, a merger or acquisition, any kind of change. Think about given these numbers, the impact where people are already change fatigued. And by the way, I have a client that's living this right now. It's a hospital, so they're also having to deal with, giving people shots to get them the vaccine. So think about adding anything on top of that. Under normal circumstances, this is a challenging situation, but with COVID, where people are fatigued, having to work remote, this is a big challenge, not insurmountable, but a challenge. So thank you for that. Okay, thank you for participation. We're going to do that one more time, just so you guys. So keep that open. There is a path forward. There's no silver bullet. If there's a consultant that ever comes in and tells you I have a silver bullet to solve all your problems and make your organization super resilient and change agile, throw them out. There is no perfect solution, but we do believe there is a solution, and with focus and intention, leaders and organizations can begin to chip away at this and really start to address it. And quite frankly, part of this is just, I used to be an adolescent counselor before I went to graduate school and got into consulting. And part of it is just people wanting to be heard. So part of it, and I'll talk a little about this, is just opening channels of communication and being even more intentional about that as an organization, as a leader. So really taking something like this and saying, hey, we think this is important enough. Our numbers are high, 70+% for change fatigue. We're gonna do something about it. Right? And it doesn't have to be earth-shattering, but we're going to do something about it. So really to begin to chip away at that and move to a place of growth and innovation. So let's see what that looks like, Olivia. Restoration blueprint. Really the key phrase there is strategic pause. And think about what I said earlier about firefighting, reactive mode. What this does is what we recommend to begin start strengthening resilience is to first kind of do a timeout and a pause, to move from reactive to productive and creative, and really refocus on this notion of resilience by targeting 3 factors. And we believe the 3 factors that drive resilience are personal resilience, which is a fairly obvious one, but it gets down to the individual's ability to manage disruption and manage their own personal reactions to change. Transformational leadership, which I'll talk more about that, which gets to leaders' ability to navigate and help people through this. And then change agility, which is the most like your typical organizational change management, but as I think it's more, as I'll talk about, it's more than that. But those 3 things together, taking a strategic pause to focus and look at those 3 things, we think is the restoration blueprint. Could you go forward, please, Olivia? 3 keys. So there are 3 keys, and this, as I said, I talked about a reactive stance moving to a creative stance. And again, from when I used to do my leadership development work, I don't think I actually did talk about that. I have a significant amount of experience in leadership development. This is a core component to any kind of leadership development that I have done in the past, which is shifting leaders' view from a reactive, which is all I'm doing is firefighting, to actually becoming aware of how much time you're spending in a reactive stance versus a growth mindset or a creative stance. So that's really what this is kind of assessing where you are today and then moving forward. And you really need to hit all three, and because they do interact and they do play off each other. So for example, if you decided, oh, we need to be a more resilient organization, so we're going to focus only on personal resilience, but ignore kind of the leadership capability in your organization, well, think about that. Your leaders, if they're not supportive of that kind of thing and putting in other things in place and, developing or demonstrating basic leadership and good leadership and management practices, it's going to be difficult to sustain that. So we really believe these things interact and work off of each other and reinforce each other. Okay, let's talk about the three of these things. Let's start with personal resilience. And for the, hang on a second, Olivia. So for those, what am I? Oh, okay, sorry, I got lost there for a second. So personal resilience. Those of you on this webinar that have done any kind of work in resilience, what typically, or read about resilience, what you typically hear about is the ability to cope and kind of tread water and just kind of get through resilience and kind of get back to your original position, right? So I had a disruption, now I'm back to quote unquote normal. The way I think about personal resilience is really bouncing forward. Is if you think about a tennis ball, for example, and you bounce a tennis ball and you don't do anything, it eventually kind of returns to its original position. It kind of bounces along and then stops on the ground and doesn't move anymore. That's the way I think about typical resilience. But when I think about personal resilience and bouncing forward, and the way I frame it, you're really kind of doing things to that ball to either make it bounce higher or put spin on it or bounce faster. That to me is bouncing forward into kind of a growth mindset. So if you look at those questions, how do I respond to disruption? When setbacks happen quickly, how do I bounce back quickly? And am I able to quickly adopt to new ways of doing things? So click forward there, Olivia. So the way we think about this within the context of organizational resilience, this particular factor is kind of reframing your response and how you think about resilience and working with your employees to think about it this way too. I'll start with the bottom bullet there on the far right on the reframing your responses, which is really thinking about building your resilience muscle. Again, this is not a, hey, we're gonna do a presentation for you, everybody's gonna be super resilient. But it is kind of starting to practice things that would enable you to begin to build that resilience muscle and get stronger and be able to manage and face disruption in a more effective way. Going back to the top one, we'll talk, resilience is one of those, is a topic we'll talk about next Wednesday, and we'll talk more about this if you choose to come to the webinar next Wednesday. It starts with kind of understanding and focusing on what you control and what you can control or influence. I mentioned coping earlier. There's nothing wrong with coping, but if it's something you have a lot of influence over, control over, you can really grow and learn from that. Even grow and learn from how effectively you cope with something. But understanding what you can and can't control is important because you don't want to be banging your head against the wall, trying to change something or affect something or react or respond to something you absolutely have no control over. And then taking time to pause and reflect and be intentional about learning, and really being intentional about that is going to help you move forward from a learning orientation. If you can go forward there, Olivia. This is called the general adaptation syndrome, this model here, and basically what it says, this is a psychological construct that I'm giving you kind of a taste of, again, what we're going to be doing next Wednesday when we dive into personal resilience. What happens is when we have a disruptive event, the first phase of that is, oh my God, fight or flight. When you get to phase 2, you start putting in strategies to kind of cope with this and manage through it. And okay, I'm gonna try to deal with it. It's still stressful and it still has an impact on your body and your system, but you're getting better at it and you're managing through that a little bit and managing to kind of get at least somewhat back to normalcy. But what happens if you don't do anything is, and that stressor continues, is, again, according to the psychological construct, you're just going to get exhausted. It's just going to wipe you out. So what we would what we would suggest from a personal resilience standpoint by using some strategies to build on this is, if you'll click, Olivia, is to really shift that last phase to, all right, I'm not gonna move into an exhaust phase. I'm gonna use this as a growth opportunity. So reflecting back on how I coped, what worked well, did I implement a new exercise routine? Did I implement some different ways on how I manage my relationships and interact with people? So this is what I mean by bouncing forward. It's shifting this model, this general adaptation syndrome, to one that moves to a growth mode. And again, it's really all about being intentional on how you respond and react to disruption and change. And by the way, just from a physical standpoint, it's better. I mean, the impact of stress on illness and disease and other things, I won't get into that in detail, is significant. So it's also, just from a personal health standpoint, a great thing to focus on. Okay, Olivia, thank you. Next slide. Transformational leadership. This, if I were to put another graphic in here and maybe in future iterations I would stick this right in the middle because of what I talked about earlier. You could go and implement some great resilience workshops or some strategies, or even you could put in some new great tools around navigating and managing change. But if you don't have this component, you're always going to run into problems. I don't know how many people on this webinar are ProSci certified or have been kind of exposed to the ProSci tournament, ProSci research and tools and methods. But ProSci is, real quickly, the world's leading organization for research and the practice of change management. And their research consistently shows what derails big change efforts is lack of visible sponsorship and leadership. I don't think it's any different with organizational resilience, which is why Shannon and I were talking about this. Said we've got to include this. This has got to be core. And that's when I talked about these three factors interacting with each other and not kind of thinking about them independently. So really, our definition of transformational leadership is guiding an organization's the ability of an organization's leaders to guide their teams through change and raise them to a higher level of performance. So if you click, Olivia. So the key to this, again, in my experience doing leadership development work, it always starts with you. So I would start with yourself on this. And if I were working with an organization, senior leaders, I'd say, all right, everybody, start asking yourself these questions before you start telling other people how to be better leaders. Do you respond positively and creatively to change? Do you think about how to do things differently or more efficiently? And do you quickly adjust based on what's happening in your organization? And the reason those questions are important within the context of resilience is, if you click, Olivia, is because people are going to be watching you. People want to see how you react to change. I remember my experience working at Coca-Cola. I was an organization effectiveness manager, and Coke at the time, it was about my second year there, went through the first layoffs in the history of the company. They had never been through layoffs. Companies, 110 years old or something like that. And we really spent time with the leaders to say, look, if you're running around the halls, screaming and yelling about how hateful everything is, and it did happen, it was a stressful time, that's going to create problems for the people that look up to you as a leader in this organization, look to you to model the actions and behaviors we need under trying circumstances. So as a change leader, when you think about organizational resilience, you've got to be a visible advocate through your actions and behaviors. And be aware of that. And the second one is important as well, and that'll be a good kind of segue into our next factor, which is being intentional and disciplined in helping others as they work through changes. And that's not only equipping managers and leaders with the tools they need, but also being there for them as a coach and a leader. My client right now is going through, as Shannon mentioned, a massive change as it relates to both a new enterprise-wide system, but also organizationally. We're going to the leaders first and saying, look, you can't just throw in, and they understand, but you can't just throw tools at people and put together a great communication plan. You've got to be involved, and people need to see you. The third piece there, creative disruption. That's a term I've used for some time now, practicing creative disruption. That really goes to moving people to a higher level of performance. And that's being out there, asking targeted questions. Why are we doing things this way? So kind of out there poking in a creative way, right? Not creative disruption, right? But going out and asking people how they can do things differently, involving them in doing things differently. And again, this goes to resilience. When you go through a big change, it's disruptive, like COVID. It's going back to your organization saying, hey, how are we doing here? Is there anything we can do differently? Are the remote meetings going as they should be going? Are you getting the support you need? So really creatively disrupting. And we've got kind of a unnatural disruption with COVID. So taking advantage of that and going back and asking your organization, how do we do with this? Okay, Olivia? Change agility, I talked about this being the most similar to what one might think of as kind of your typical organizational change management kind of methodology and implementation. But it really is more than that. And certainly I know, Shannon and I, when we work with clients, it's more than that. And it really is not just about actually, if you think about it, it's the reactive versus kind of creative thing. It's more than just, we need to put in Workday. So let's kind of make sure we have all the things in place to make sure people, when Workday goes up, it's live, everybody's trained up, they know what to do. That's good. We need to do that. That's really important. But it's bigger than that as well. It's also creating the internal capacity to do those things better over time and to recognize those things and anticipate those things. So again, you can see the intersection with something like transformational leadership. As if you're doing leadership development programming, these are the kinds of things that leaders need to understand and learn about. So it's really being intentional about how you put in a new change. It's understanding complexity of changes and customizing your approach based on the complexity of that. But it's also building that internal change capacity. And again, when I'm on projects, I really push to do sessions with change leaders on the client, the frontline managers and supervisors, the change champions, to educate them on, hey, let's talk about what change is and how people react to change and how you can do that in your organization moving forward. Okay, so let's talk about, so ask yourself, is your team and organization well equipped to respond to change? And some of that may be kind of looking back with the unplanned change with COVID, right? And asking your organization, how do we do with this? This is a huge change. Does your organization navigate change with minimal disruption and risk? Are you able to implement a change without turning your organization upside down? And again, some of that is the tools you have in place, and some of that's the capability of your people. And from a leadership standpoint, the leadership intersection, does leadership encourage me to think about how I can do things better and more efficiently? That's the proactive side of the coin when you think about change agility, which is not only are we putting in new systems or reorganizing in a way that is is minimally disruptive, but we're looking for ways to do things better and different. Okay, could you click forward, Olivia? Thank you. So for you, really, it's navigate or educate and equip people with the tools to successfully manage change. Small investment, huge return. Encourage, measure, and reward innovation and nimbleness. The last one, I kind of added this one at the last minute. And I think the U.S. military kind of started this ages ago. It was called the After Action Review. Some of you are probably familiar with that. But I would encourage, from a change standpoint and a resilience standpoint, to think about really being intentional about action learning. And this is a perfect opportunity to do it with resilience. So in the military, they would do something and they would regroup after and say, all right, what did we intend to accomplish here? And sometimes, when I've done this before, by the way, people can't even agree on what they intended to accomplish in the first place, which of course is a problem. What did we intend to accomplish? Did we accomplish it? Why or why not? What can we do better or different? And I'm not talking about a 30-minute, one flip chart that says what went well and what, if better than. I mean, that's better than doing nothing. I'm talking about a deep dive with your organization, with focus groups. And I think part of change agility is doing that, because you become more agile as you learn what went well and what you could do better moving forward. Okay, Olivia. So we're going to do another one of these poll EV things. If you still have it open, that's great. Otherwise, open it up. And what we're going to ask you is, out of these three things, based on what I described, what is most important for your organization right now? All right. And maybe another 10 or 15 seconds. Hopefully everybody's able to do it okay. Okay. Transformational leadership is right there in the middle of 63%. It warms my heart. Shannon knows my experience in leadership development, but there is some recognition the others are important as well. Interestingly, I spent some time running leadership development at Emory University, their business school. And one of the things that we did as part of leadership development programming was resilience. So we actually incorporated that into it because obviously, again, as I mentioned throughout this, they interact or are interdependent. Great. And change agility. Again, there's a lot of change going on, not just COVID, but other things that are happening outside of COVID. That's great. Thank you. Next slide, please. So at the highest level, and Shannon talked a little bit about this, that first bullet, taking a strategic pause. And what does that mean? What that means is connect with your organization and do a pulse check against these three factors. This is important in two ways. One, you're getting data on how well you're doing and where the red flags are and where you might be doing really great. So, the assessment might show, people are pretty resilient here, but our leadership really is lacking. Or our leadership's really doing great, but you know what? People don't feel like we're agile enough. We're not managing change effectively enough. In our research and our experience, that rolls up to an overall kind of thinking on how we're doing from an organizational resilience standpoint. But you can cut those up to really get some good data points and understand where you're at. So that's one way this is an important and good thing to do. The second way is people, you demonstrate to your organization that you're listening to them and you want to know how things are going and that you recognize it's been a tough year. So it's a demonstrable way of reaching out to your organization saying, hey, we realize it's been a tough year. There's been a lot of change, both COVID and potentially otherwise. We want to know how we're doing and how we can do better. And the way we're going to do that is by understanding where we are today and then taking action, focused action forward based on where we are today. So that's really, I think, again, under normal circumstances, I would always recommend making sure you have your finger on the pulse of your organization. I think it's super important right now, given what's going on. So that's one thing. And that gets to kind of the second bullet is really listening to your workforce by creating, nurturing, or kind of strengthening channels of communication. And what this may look like is kind of a communications audit. Are people getting more than just kind of basic, email kind of information that doesn't have any depth to it, or are they not even getting that? Or do we have the right collaborative systems in place given we're remote? And when we are in the office, are we making the best use of that time? So really kind of understanding where you are from a communication standpoint and really making sure you focus on those channels. And then the third one is recommitting to professional development and growth. And that's visually, not visually, but demonstrably doing that. So people know that you're doing that and you communicate that you're doing that. And you back that strategic voice up with action. And what we would recommend is, given what's going on, using organizational resilience is kind of a background and a basis for recommitting to that professional development and growth. So giving them the tools, giving them the new awareness, obviously giving them some understanding of what these things mean and why it's important to them. So really kind of giving them the tools through recommitting to professional growth. Okay, Olivia? That was what I had for this. As I mentioned in the next session on February 10th, I'll do a little bit of a deeper dive, again, a relatively short session like this, but a little bit of a deeper dive into personal resilience. And if you choose to come to that, I think we'll have some good dialogue about that and some things that you can do from a strategic standpoint to start to strengthen your own resilience. And you can see my contact information there. So I think now, by the way, thank you to whoever said thank you there. Thank you for coming. We want to open it up to questions, and we've got about 15, 20 minutes. So I would love to hear your questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark. If anyone, we had a couple questions come in, but if anyone has another one, please feel free to send it in using either the chat box or the Q&A, or of course, feel free to reach out to Mark. His email is up there on the screen. So our first question says, can you talk about how COVID times have made the need for transformational leadership look a little different?
I would say not look a little, look a lot different. Yeah, I just think it's because you can't have that one-to-one personal interaction. I just think I keep using the word intentional. But it really requires leaders to be more intentional and focused in how they engage and work with people. You can't just walk down the hall and knock on someone's door. You've got to be thoughtful and planful about how you keep people engaged and communicate to them. So it's really kind of thinking through what strategies can I use to make sure that's the case. And do I know where my people are at? Do I know how they're feeling about these things? I would never make assumptions as a leader on where my people are at from an engagement standpoint under normal circumstances. I would definitely not make assumptions about where people are at under these circumstances.
Great, thanks, Mark.
Mm-hmm.
This next question says, what is something everyone can start doing today to build up their personal resilience?
One of the things we'll talk about next week, is reflection. So if you've been through a specific incident that was disruptive for you personally, professionally, what I would do is do your own kind of personal strategic pause. And see, now I'm tapping into my old adolescent counselor days. Got personal strategic pause and think about, in that situation, did I have as much control over that situation as I thought? Did I apply the right strategies? What happened as a result of the strategies I applied? So let's say I have an interaction with Shannon that's not a productive interaction. That never happens, Shannon, of course. So this is a simple example, but kind of thinking about that and say, what could I do differently? Why did I get the results that I got? So it's kind of a mini personal after action review, and write it down. You don't have to spend hours on this, but you would be shocked, and maybe you wouldn't, maybe some of you wouldn't, at how helpful that can be. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Mark. And then it looks like our last question is, what is one way I can be a transformational leader starting today?
Wow, that's a pretty heavy question. Buy yourself a cape that has big T on the back. No, I'm kidding. Super transformational leader. Yeah, I always start with listening and inquiry. Listening is the bloodline of an organization. So it starts with actually taking time to hear where people are at, where their struggles are, that sort of thing. And it's kind of, its sister is inquiry, right? So listening, its sibling is inquiry. Inquiry is based on what you're hearing, asking targeted questions, open-ended questions. And again, this is core to any leadership development work I've done, is making time. And I'm not talking listening while you're checking emails on Zoom, or listening while you're walking down the hall saying hi to people. I'm talking about real listening, sitting across from somebody, or scheduling a one-on-one Zoom time with somebody to say, hey, I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. And I had a few questions for you to make sure I understand, I'm being as supportive as I can for you, given what's going on. That's where I would start from transformational leadership.
That's great. Looks like those are all of the questions that came in. But once again, if you do have any more questions or just want to talk about organizational resilience, please reach out to Mark. And then, as we said at the beginning, everyone will receive a recording of this webinar so you can watch on demand or share with your colleagues. And we will also send a link to register for our final session about personal resilience next Wednesday. So we definitely hope to see you then. And thank you everyone for joining. Have a great rest of your day.